I'm here at the Helmsley Building at 230 Park Avenue in New York City, which was once known as the New York Central Building. This is where one of the early leading figures in the New York Mafia, boss Salvatore Maranzano, was taken out by assassins. In 1931, Salvatore Maranzano engineered the killing of a rival crime boss named Joe Masseria. He approached Masseria's top lieutenant, Luciano, and told him that if he helped kill Masseria, in return he would get to take over Masseria's rackets and become his second in command. Luciano agreed, and on April 15, 1931, Masseria was lured to a restaurant in Coney Island named Nuova Villa Tamaro, where he was to meet with Luciano. Story has it that while in the middle of a card game with Masseria, Luciano excused himself to use the bathroom, and that's when hitmen stormed the restaurant and gunned down Masseria. With the threat to his power now out of the way, Maranzano proclaimed himself as the boss of bosses and appointed Lucky Luciano to take over Masseria's Borgata. Some sources credit Maranzano as organizing the New York Mafia into 5 defined and structured families. However, soon into his tenure as boss, people were displeased with Maranzano's rule and saw him as arrogant, greedy, and old-fashioned. He admired Roman Emperor Julius Caesar and was known to quote him often, which earned him the nickname Little Caesar, although the street toughs around him weren't exactly impressed with his historical references. Maranzano was also planning to wipe out dozens of individuals and had compiled a hit list of people that he planned to have killed, which included Lucky Luciano. Once Maranzano saw the smart and ambitious Luciano as a threat to his reign, he wanted him eliminated. So he hired an Irish gangster named Vincent Mad Dog Cole to do the job. However, Luciano's ally and future boss of the Lucchese family, Tommy Lucchese, had caught wind of this plan and alerted Luciano that Maranzano had him marked for death. That's when Luciano decided to strike first. On September 10, 1931, Maranzano was in his office at the New York Central Building. Killers hired by Lucky Luciano, who were said to be Jewish gangsters, entered the building posing as government agents. Tommy Lucchese was in Maranzano's office under the pretense of a meeting, but was secretly there to point out Maranzano to the hitmen. The men took the elevator to the 9th floor where Maranzano's office was. They then headed towards his office in Suite 926. When they entered the office, they immediately disarmed Maranzano's guards. Lucchese helped the assassins locate Maranzano. They then entered his office and pinned him against the wall, but Maranzano fought back furiously. They stabbed him several times in the face and body, then strangled him. Then they finished him off for good by shooting him 6 times. With Masseria and Maranzano gone, Luciano sat atop the Mafia's hierarchy and was now the premier chieftain in New York City. Lucky appointed Vito Genovese as his underboss and Frank Costello as his consigliere. Joe Bonanno took over the Borgata previously ruled by Salvatore Maranzano, and thus the Bonanno family formed. The elimination of the power-hungry, avaricious, and bellicose Maranzano ushered in a new era of New York's 5 mafia families, all of whom developed partnerships with one another instead of rivalries, and together they formed a tremendously powerful organized crime conglomerate around the world.
Luciano was a close ally to Jewish mobster Meyer Lansky, who led the Jewish crime element in New York City and was a major gambling racketeer and bootlegger. Nicknamed the mob's accountant due to him advising them on how to handle the money that they earned by channeling it through such avenues as money laundering and offshore bank accounts. He was the prime ambassador between the Italian and Jewish mobs.
He had an uncanny penchant for handling money and earning profits, and the strong business connection between Lansky and Luciano helped Luciano achieve even more prominence in the underworld. Furthermore, Luciano established a Mafia board of directors known as the Commission, which was comprised of the country's most prominent Mafia leaders at the time. The Commission was put into place in order to mediate conflicts between families and approve important decisions, with the aim to minimize bloodshed and maximize profit. Luciano had also sought to unite criminal organizations from different ethnicities into one cohesive unit, which the press dubbed the National Crime Syndicate. Salvatore Lucania, aka Charles Lucky Luciano, became the most influential crime boss in the United States.
Next to nobody would have contested Luciano if he declared himself as the new boss of bosses, but instead he decided to abolish that title, as he felt that the position caused rifts between families and would have also made him a target for another challenger looking to rise up the ranks.
Lucky's pal, Meyer, was a preeminent figure in Cuba, where he was heavily involved in gambling and casinos. By the end of Prohibition in 1933, Lansky helped Luciano and other mobsters get fully entrenched in Cuba's gambling scene as well as other ventures. Cuba was also a major hub for the mob's drug trafficking due to its proximity to the US and South America.
Lansky worked alongside Cuba's Army Colonel and future President Fulgencio Batista, and Batista began carrying out extensive business dealings with American mobsters, which brought in astronomical profits for all of those involved. Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky continued to thrive off of each other's brilliant criminal minds, and by 1935, they had changed the face of organized crime.
Then a major blow to Luciano's reign came in June of 1936, when he was indicted with several others on charges related to a $12 million a year prostitution ring. At the end of the trial, he was convicted of 62 racketeering counts, then was sentenced to a 30 to 50-year prison term. He still tried to run things from prison, going through his newly appointed acting boss, Vito Genovese. In 1937, Genovese fled to Italy to escape a murder prosecution where he stayed for several years, and Frank Costello then took over leadership of the family. However, just a few years later, World War II brought Luciano a lucky break. The US government had concerns about the waterfront being vulnerable to enemy sabotage as well as worker strikes, and the military also needed assistance for them and their allies to invade the fascist-ruled Sicily. Knowing that the mob had control of the docks as well as connections in Sicily, they struck a deal with Luciano that if he used his power to aid them with intelligence on these matters, he would receive a sentence reduction. The Sicilian Mafia was more than willing to help America enter Sicily, since Italy's dictator Benito Mussolini had been trying to eradicate them. Through Luciano's Sicilian contacts, the military was able to obtain maps of the island's harbors, pictures of the coastline, and names of mafiosi willing to aid them, which helped them successfully invade Sicily. After Mussolini and his regime were overthrown, the Mafia in Sicily saw a big resurgence in the coming years. After assisting with the war effort, Lucky's sentence was commuted by New York Governor Thomas Dewey, but he was deported to his birthplace of Italy in February of 1946 and ordered never to return to the US. After his exile, Luciano wasted no time getting back to involvement with international crime operations. In October of 1946, he entered Cuba by way of Brazil and had obtained a permit to stay in the country for 6 months. In late December 1946, Luciano allegedly arranged a major convention of Italian and Jewish mobsters to discuss organized crime matters, which took place at the Hotel Nacional in Havana, Cuba, which is known as the Havana Conference. It's said that this meeting included many of the most significant crime figures in the US and was to discuss a variety of topics, some of which included their problematic dealings in Las Vegas with Jewish gangster Bugsy Siegel, as well as international narcotics trafficking.
However, there's some evidence to suggest that there may have never actually been a single large-scale summit of powerful mobsters all meeting together at one time in December, and that the story of this event had been embellished by Luciano's biographers. Instead, it's believed that numerous small meetings between Luciano and other crime figures occurred at different junctures in Havana from the time that Luciano arrived there in October. After American authorities were alerted to Lucky's presence in Cuba, they pressured the Cuban government to either arrest or exile him.
On February 22, 1947, Harry Anslinger, the U.S. Federal Narcotics Commissioner and former leader of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, suspended the shipment of medicinal drugs to Cuba, such as painkillers, which the country was in desperate need of, due to them allowing Luciano to have haven there. Spurred by the drug supply ban, Cuban authorities acted swiftly, and the following day, Secret Service agents picked up Luciano and detained him at an immigration camp while they investigated his activities and connections. Ultimately, he was charged with perjury for swearing that he was of good moral character upon entering Cuba, and was ordered to be deported. On March 19, 1947, he was put on a ship which sailed to Genoa, Italy, effectively being banished from Cuba. During this time, an American law enforcement memo referred to Luciano as, quote, one of the world's most dangerous criminals and exercises a powerful influence over the entire underworld. He is financed by his old associates, and they continually plan for his return to power in America. He is a threat to law enforcement so long as he lives. Even being expelled from both the US and Cuba didn't dissuade the driven Luciano. He began building a power base in Italy and Sicily and continued to find ways to remain involved with global mob activities in the coming years, in spite of him being under close surveillance by Italian authorities. In 1957, Vito Genovese seized control of the Luciano family. And from there on out, it was known as the Genovese family, which would be one of the biggest and most powerful crime families in the country for several decades. Then, in January of 1959, Cuban revolutionary Fidel Castro and his army had succeeded in overthrowing Fulgencio Batista's government. Batista fled the country, Castro shut down the mob-run casinos in Havana, and mobsters took their business interests elsewhere as Castro's communist regime commenced. After Castro's coup, Meyer Lansky and other mobsters turned their interests back to Las Vegas, and it quickly replaced Havana as the mob's gambling and casino mecca. With so many major shifts in dynamics, by this point Luciano could no longer exert the same kind of power and influence he once did. Although still considered a significant figure in the underworld, his role evolved into more of an elder statesman in his later years. On January 26, 1962, Luciano had met with film producer Martin Gosch at the Capodichino Airport in Naples, Italy, to discuss a biopic about his life, and there, Luciano collapsed and died of a heart attack at the age of 64. At the time of his death, Italian agents had been shadowing him due to his suspected involvement in a $150 million a year worldwide drug smuggling ring. Hundreds of mourners attended his funeral services in Naples. His body was flown back to the US, and under the direction of his brother Bartolo, his coffin was taken straight from the airport to the cemetery, where he was interred in a $43,000 marble family vault. The interment was attended by 50 law enforcement agents, 40 reporters, and only 2 mourners, his brothers Bartolo and Joseph. There were no ceremonies.
Lucky Luciano, having the last boss of bosses, Salvatore Maranzano, taken out, was one of the most pivotal assassinations in Mafia history, and resulted in him rising to unprecedented power, which set off a chain of events that shifted the entire landscape of organized crime around the world.
This picture was long believed to be that of Salvatore Maranzano, but that has been disproved. This man is Salvatore Messina, a London-based gangster from the 1930s. The only known pictures of Maranzano are the ones from his death scene. Then this pic surfaced, which for years was alleged to be a sketch of Maranzano's face based on the images of his dead body, but as it turns out, this is actually a picture of the old silent film actor Rudolph Valentino, which has just been flipped around and doctored up. After hitting a wall in my efforts to locate an authentic picture of Maranzano while he was alive, I was still intrigued by the continuing mystery of what he looked like. So I procured the services of an artist skilled in digital facial reconstruction. They applied the best of their abilities to use the limited visible features in the available images of Maranzano to create a composite of him. Together, we fine-tuned some physical details which resulted in this rendering. A graphic which may finally give a fair idea of his general appearance. Maranzano was buried at the St. John's Cemetery in Queens, and his grave is just a short distance away from Luciano's.